Welcome to Season 6 of the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For the 6th season premiere, I had the opportunity to interview author and poet Stephen W. Sweigart. On the day the interview was recorded, July 27th, 2023, Stephen's latest book, CoNMaNSiNiT, a poetry book parodying 50 members of the United States Congress, was released. On a technical note, this is the first time I've ever used Zoom to record an interview for this podcast. I'm here with Stephen Sweigart, who is an author and poet. Stephen, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
And this is actually the third time that I've tried to interview you. The first two times we had all sorts of technical problems, but it looks like we're good to go. Third time's the charm.
Yes. 3 strikes, you're out. We're going to hit the third strike.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, I got interested really in poetry when I was at University of Pennsylvania. I had 2 courses. The first year at Xavier, they didn't give me English. I was studying psychiatry and I had biology and that, etc. But when I went to the psychiatry at University of Pennsylvania, I switched there. They gave me English courses, and I fell in love with modern poetry, mostly Pound, and also James Joyce, modern literature. And when I was at Temple, I switched to Temple because they told me my calling was in science. I shouldn't be in English. My teacher said I should have went to him and he would have got me to stay in English. But I went to Temple because I had friends there and my landlord worked there that I rented a room from. So I had very good teachers at Temple, most of them very good professors. Like I had a great professor for Finnegan's Wake. I had a great professor for Milton, and Shakespeare was a good professor. And I also had the same person for Milton that did Spencer. But I've worked most of my life. I had some good success in the mid 70s with my book Jason, but I had to work all my life, and I especially ran into problems with my book Antichrist. I couldn't read anymore because it's more of a chorus poem where it takes a number of people to read, and it's in 3 languages, which I don't write in different. I only write in English now, and it was in 3 languages. And it was on my trip to it was written while I was in graduate, the first semester of graduate, the only one I stayed in at graduate school, Temple. And I wrote the first so many pages. And then I saw how to sell my house because of the economics. And I had bought a house a few years earlier. And I went to Hungary, which I had met people, because I wanted to use in Jason Bartók's Bluebeard Castle, and I wanted to be able to pronounce Hungarian. So I had a tutor for 2 years, and she had relatives in Hungary. I've said this in other podcasts. I went there 3 times. They were very nice to me, and it was really excellent. I rented rooms with families and we traveled all over Hungary, and I really enjoyed it. Then I've worked most of my life in a family business. I started out to try to get a teach, but in those days they didn't. Teaching wasn't very monetary, and they didn't give for substitute teaching benefits, and they were minimum wage. And my father wanted me to come back, especially because of insurance, and so I went there. But he never liked. My 2 brothers were forced to take business. They didn't like to, but they did. I wouldn't. He didn't like that, so I ended up in the warehouse. After so many years, I left. I had to leave. It wasn't good. You know what I mean? And I got a job at Burlington County Planning Board for the minimum wage for a grant. But at the end, I had an apartment, and they wouldn't give me a raise, and I left. and I think I left on bad terms, but I left. And then my father, in the meantime, my father kept going to lunch with me, telling me to come back. So I went back and worked a couple more years in the warehouse, and then I worked in the office ever since then. And the past 15 years or so, I've done finances. I'm only working 3 hours a week now. I was working 3 hours 5 days a week, but now I'm only working 3 hours a week. I hope only to spend my time doing poetry, even though I have less money.
Now, without spoiling too much of your books, how many books have you written and what are some of your books about?
Well, I had 12, but one. Guess what happened today on Amazon and Barnes and Noble? My new book just came out, and it's called CoNMaNSiNiT, and it's a modern poem like Jason, which is derived from Finnegan's Wake, not as Finnegan's Wake, but derived from it, and also the Martyrdom, which is modern. My Afghan War, Curse of Jesus of Nazareth, The Creatures of Prometheus, uh, the Prometheus the Firebringer are all in plain English. That they're in projective verse. Uh, and Rome, I also wrote a poem when I was with Temple in Rome, only 6 months with Temple in Rome, on Rome, which I traveled around myself, and they took us on a tour of Italy, which I wrote about artworks. But you really need to see the artworks, which maybe you can do on the internet or when you're in Rome, to appreciate it totally. But that's 100 pages. I only recently was able to type it up, and it just came out this spring. And I also a new poem is Exists Mankind from the beginning of last year, which is about. I first used to say scientific creation, but now I'm saying, because of my last podcast, cosmological, biological, and world mythological creation, which is uh, matter, uh, creation, life, which is biological creation, and then life itself, which is mythology. The world. After that, people exist on mythology, on myths, and things of that sort, and religion, and that's what it's about. And that starts with the Big Bang, and then it goes into biological combinations with Darwin, and then it ends up with a lot of different things.
Now, are all your books poetry or poetry collections, or just some of them poetry or poetry collections?
They're all poetry, but they're in Walt Whitman wrote in a more of a prose style, and my books are mostly in projective verse. Now there's three that are modern, or no, four that are more modern. Jason has some early poems. They're in projective verse and a little bit of Italian, but Jason was I wrote it in a style of Finnegan's Wake, but I put on the side, I studied all the myths of Jason all through history, and I put on the side the references. You can understand it. I gave a reading of it, was very popular, and people liked it, of just the sound. It's just sound. And but if you read this, where they come from, if you read Apollonius Rhodius section or Ovid's section, then you'll really understand it. And that's the same with my new poem. The new poem is a satire. I'm sorry to say this, a satire of congressmen and senators who, in the beginning of the year, they had Congress had a bill on the denunciation of socialism. I've traveled much in socialist countries and read Marxism a lot, or when I was earlier, and I traveled a lot in socialist countries, and after I traveled also. But they did this, and I put them in there, 50 of them, and I did a satire, but it's factual. But you really have to read their biography. I want people to read their biography of their senators and congressmen. There's only 50 of them in there, but they should read their biography. Then they'll really understand what I wrote. But they can understand. You can understand without it. But it's in the style of the martyrdom, which is capitals, small letters, shortening of things like Finnegan's Wake, making up new words, and things of that sort. And that just came out today. So I don't know what the reception was. Some people really like Jason. Some people hate it. But some of the more people that like Joyce, Finnegan's Wake, and Ezra Pound like Jason. And if you really, if you know the classics from Roman history, and I even do the Caxton Lefebvre of English, the early English, I have that in there, and uh, I have other people in there. I have Morris in there, another English poet from the Elizabethans. There's stories about Jason. I have him in there, and I have Seneca too, his Medea. So that if you read the sections and read them, then you really understand. And it's the same with the biographies. I don't think people are going to read all 50 biographies, but maybe if there's any of theirs, they should really study the biographies of their senators and uh, congressmen, and they might get a little joke out of their names. I make fun of. If in the thing, I have the book now because I didn't get a copy. I only got an ebook today. And but at the bottom, I have the real name. Like I have uh, Marjorie Marjorie Taylor Greene, and her name in the beginning is Eminem TG, and I spell Eeegee Eminem TG because she's called MTG. So that's I did it to all of them, and but their real names on the bottom so you can know who it is.
Now, you've been an author for a very long time, and how has writing and publishing books changed since you started writing books?
Oh, it's all the difference in the world. Now, when Amazon came along and is the biggest publisher, and they don't reject people. Even if you don't sell a lot, like I'm starting to sell a little now because I promote on Twitter, and I promote $10 a day. And I like today, the other day I just promoted that it was coming out, CoNMaNSiNiT, and I got more than 10,000 impressions for $10. So I've been doing that. I first started getting 2,000. I'm getting more. And I just promoted 2 more days of it because it's only out on Amazon and Barnes and Noble now. I'm waiting for Books A Million and the rest of a bookshop. And my books are all over the world. I don't sell a lot. I'm still way in the minus. I have to pay for the books. I have to pay for the podcast, but prices have come down. Not so much have come down. My podcasts are way less than I used to pay for them because I guess I'm a little more popular, which is the way things are in capitalism. What sells, people are interested in, and they make money off of people are interested in. So that's I used to say in one podcast, capitalism is censorship, because the only thing, when I started out, I went to New York to 5 publishers, and they said, poetry doesn't sell. We don't want nothing to do with you. And capitalism, only what is printed sells. But now since all the online stores, and now there's a lot of independent publishers, not the big publishers, and they want to take your books. There's a lot of I don't deal with marketers. For me, they're a waste of money. I can market myself. I can market things myself. Like Twitter is really great, and I put things on Facebook a little. Now there's Threads, but I also send copies to universities and a few bookstores locally, and a few bookstores, promotional copies for free. And but if you want to get into big bookstores like Barnes and Noble, and them, a lot of people are in there with poetry. You really have to pay a marketer or an agent to do that, and they require that because they can't take everybody's books in a brick and mortar place. It's not like Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Books A Million. They don't have the stock. They don't have to have the stock. They can just do it online, and that's how things have changed. And now with Twitter, I'm crossing my fingers. It's much freer. I'm a Marxist, and I say things that some people don't like, and but I have trouble with. I was in the Communist Party USA for a while, and I left them, and they were extremely nice to me, But I believe in China, and the same with that Trotskyist contacted me a year ago. I told them I accept China, so we don't get along. And China has a lot of people say China is capitalism. Well, that's the 21st century capital, and that's how you're going to get the. When I wrote about the DDR and Czechoslovakia. The DDR is the Deutsche Democratic Republic, so East Germany. The reason they fell, the main reason was blockades and sanctions. I write in there. But the other reason is because they didn't accept fascists and capitalists. And that's why they say there's no human rights. A lot of people in the United States say, because they don't accept capitalists and fascists. They wouldn't allow, they got cleared out all the fascists in their government from Germany, from what they had in Germany with Hitler. And I think if in a new society, you should have you would have to have both. Maybe in a distant future, you will be able to have sub-communism, stuff like that. But the Trotskyists and the Communist Party USA, and I haven't dealt with the Communist Party USA for a while, are 19th century Marxists and communists. They believe in, their main purpose is the working class. They believe in a working class, and that is the same with a number of other countries. But China is not that way. As you've seen, people come to the Congress. I'm talking too much about Marxism now, but that's in my books. The Afghan war is. I'm really against war. When I left Xavier, really because two reasons. Because they made me had mandatory ROTC, and it was during the Vietnam War. And I don't accept the Catholic religion, but Xavier was a great place. They treated me well, and education was great. But my books are like, Kate Delaney asked me, I said, my main book thing of all my books is the same I say at the end, is Prometheus the Firebringer. There was 3 parts of Aeschylus: Prometheus Bound, Prometheus Unbound, and Prometheus the Firebringer. The only part that survived is Bound, because I don't believe they were lost. I believe they were destroyed because they don't want people to help mankind. They don't want people to help average persons. And that's what the poem's about. Now, Shelley wrote Prometheus Bound. A number of people wrote Prometheus the Firebringer, and we'll see what happens. My copy was done by Archway Publishing. That was my first printing in 2017. And that's a Simon & Schuster subdivision, but they're a little too expensive for me. I don't have that kind of money. I'm not that well off. I have to shop around. Plus, I've worked in capitalist business for years, and I believe in competition. And I even play Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and I play stores against each other, and people, contractors against each other, because I believe in competition, and I really do. If you get stuck in that, and I also believe, like Bernie Sanders believes in Medicare for all. I believe in health care for all, but I believe that the capitalists and the Medicare should compete, because what will happen is you'll have nothing but bureaucracy in medicine, in Medicare, and you won't have any freedom. You won't be able to have any diversity. And that's why, and the capitalists are entrenched in this country. If we're going to have socialism or something, we have to follow our tradition. They're entrenched in this country. You just can't get rid of them. That you can't get rid of them. You have to let them survive. And I have I have Medicare with Cigna, and other companies are good too. I'm just not saying they're great. And I like them a lot, but they have to be controlled. Like the big pharma takes advantage of people and prices, like Bernie Sanders has been pushing, in a lot of people in Congress. They'll rape everybody, and which they have in the past. Because look at the opioid situation. To make money, they killed thousands of people. And the same is with psychiatry. Giving people, over sedating people in the psychiatry, in the prisons and the psychiatric facilities. They destroy their lives for 2 or 3 years afterwards. And a lot of times the people are in there, psychologists in the psychiatric facilities are the people that couldn't make it to have their own practice and make big money, so that they put them in, they end up in there, and they don't know what they're doing. Not all of them. Some of them are good people. And so my martyrdom starts out with mind control. The socialization to the capitalist system is prison and mind control, and controlling people's minds. I don't want to get into that because it's very controversial. People think I'm crazy, but I also believe transgender people are created to make money. Some of them are real, but some of them, from my studies, I worked in experimental psychology at University of Pennsylvania, and I studied on my own experimental psychology. A lot of them wanted to start it. They want to experiment. These doctors, they make money off of it. They make money off of creating these people, and but a lot of them are as good. You know what I mean? But I've just tweeted about Hungary, the Orban. That you can't force the Taliban and the Muslims to be Christians and capitalists. You can't force Orban's country. He's been elected. Biden's been in power 30 years. Bernie Sanders has been in power. What is it? McConnell has been in power 30 years by elections. So why can't Orban be in? And he gets close to being losing, but so do they. And same with Putin. People say Putin's a tyrant, but he's the elected official. And really, people say the Republicans say Biden's a tyrant, and the Democrats say Trump's a tyrant. McConnell's a tyrant. So it's pretty much the same thing. So I try to look at that from both sides. I really, traveling in both countries, before the wall and after, I've been in before the wall and after in Hungary and other countries, in Czechia and Slovakia now. Actually, both sides have good and both sides have bad. And the best for, and in our country, it has to be our tradition. We can't force China, which is 2,000 years, to become like us. We can't force them. They've had a tradition for 2,000 years, but people want to force them to make capitalist democracy there. And the missionaries want to go there and make people Christians. That's not going to happen. They have Confucius and Tao for centuries. It's not going to happen. So yeah, you're letting me talk a lot. You're letting me talk a lot.
Okay, well, I do have a couple other questions to ask you, but you expressed quite a few political views that some of which I agree with, some of which I disagree with. But I have to move on to the next question.
Give me the next question.
If you have a typical writing routine, what is that like for you?
I'll tell you what it is. That's because of the University of Pennsylvania and psychology. I believe in the subconscious. I believe in thinking, and I do research on my books like Afghan War and things like that. And like my present poem, I read the biographies. I believe in I'm just going to start the new poem, and the subconscious is very, very important. I've known numerous operas, maybe 80. I know almost all the operas have been. And this is in my, I recently, 6 months ago, reread Paradise Regained of Milton. And I don't remember anything about it now, but it's inside of me, if you understand. And the subconscious and I try to let the subconscious do my writing. And before, when I was young, I had to use manuscripts and rewrite stuff, but I don't do that anymore. I don't rewrite. When I sit down, I almost write down the complete section of the page, but I only work a little at a time. I don't sit down and write a real lot. I only work a little at a time, and that's what I do.
Now, you've worked in different businesses outside of writing for 40 years. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, what were some of the businesses or industries that you worked in?
Well, in sophomore years, after the freshman year in high school, I got a job for the whole summer with Howard Johnson's on the Turnpike near where I lived. And then I went into and worked with the union guys. We had a union, our family business, and I worked with a union guy unloading trucks. They didn't have forklifts in those days. They had flatbed trucks. We had to unload them by hand. Tile in those days, floor tile in those days was thin boxes. Later, they became thick. I did a lot of manual labor in my life, working there, working in the warehouse. I worked with the union guys. I got to like them. In fact, people probably think that I was a union breaker, but actually, the guy I worked with, he was an older guy, and I worked for him for many years. Even afterwards, he invited me to his house with his family, and the shop steward did too. He invited me to his house to meet his family. So I really liked them a lot. And I like a lot of things about the union. Some things I don't agree with, but because I come from a family, you know, they voted the union out. I wasn't allowed to vote. They wouldn't let me vote. They voted the union out. They infiltrated and voted the union out. So, but that I have nothing to do with that. But I support unions. But I really think that they have there's questionable things about them too. I also believe in small businesses. The socialists, Kadar, and later in Slovakia, they let small businesses thrive. And I believe in. I've dealt with small business people for many years, and most of them are really great people. Most of them are really great people.
Well, Stephen, that was my final question, and I thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author Podcast. And my phone is ringing, so one final thing. Happy book release day.
Yeah, and I'm sorry we didn't talk more about the books, but I have on the other podcasts, and I didn't get you. So I really wanted to talk this way today. I really appreciate it, Aaron. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And you don't have to agree. I don't force people to agree.
I understand. Like I said, there's some of your political views you express that I agree with, and others I disagree with. So
yes, and I don't really want to force people, but I don't want people to force me either. I don't want people in the Congress voting to denounce socialism. I don't want that.
okay.
I'll see you.
All right.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Stephen was a very interesting guest for this podcast, and it's wonderful that we were finally able to get the technical issues sorted out. Before I sign off, I will mention that I am considering changing the name of this podcast after the season 6 finale, which is expected to be December, although I've not made a final decision on that. When I make a final decision as to what the name of this podcast will be for season 7 and going forward, you'll hear it from me first. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at AuthorAAC and on Instagram at AACScribe. Copyright 2023, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.